So welcome to week 3 of 5 of the Wisdom Realizing Emptiness, or the Wisdom of Emptiness. And this is quite a profound module for discovering Buddhism, because this is really the root of all samsaric suffering, is the ignorance which thinks that things and self exist inherently. And this Wisdom Realizing Emptiness is the direct antidote to that. So this module is quite special because we're looking at the antidote to all the suffering of samsaric existence. So what I thought we'd just recap today is a little bit about why we meditate on emptiness. And then we're going to look at in more detail about what it means to a self, an I, and to get some terminology clear. We're going to just make sure we know what the aggregates are. Don't worry if you don't know what that means just yet. And then we're going to look at, once we've got those kind of terms sorted, we're going to look at a reason to prove that things don't exist inherently. There's many of them in the texts, and we're just going to look at a straightforward one, an easy one. It's in 4 parts. So before we do that, then let's just I'm just trying to find the file.
Don't say let's recap on next week and ask Michelle a question. That's with But I'll join in, of course. I'm grateful to be here.
I'm just going to find the prayers for the teaching for our session together. Sorry, I should have had those ready, but I can't see them. Anyway, don't worry, I won't share my screen this time. I'll just do a little meditation on it. And the verses that we normally do are these refuge verses from refuge and bodhicitta lines. For a verse we repeat 3 times in Tibetan. And the first 2 lines are about establishing a safety, a kind of place that we turn to when things get difficult. Different levels of practitioners have different reasons to go for refuge, not just for worldly things, but thinking about trying to make sure we don't fall into lower states of existence next life. That's the first level. Try to get free of all samsaric existence altogether. That would be the good reason for this this module. And then the last reason is that you want to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha as a way to liberate all sentient beings. You want to be a refuge for all living beings. And that ties in with this bodhicitta, which is the second 2 lines, which is you want to become enlightened for all living beings' sake. There's 2 aspirations, that bodhicitta motivation, the brave hero motivation, that you wish that all living beings, wherever they are, were experiencing blissful happiness all the time and be free of all the difficulties in all its variations around the universe. So I'm just going to recite these lines twice in Tibetan, once in English. And if you know them, you can join in. If not, you're not obliged to, but just think along those lines that whatever level of refuge and bodhicitta you feel comfortable with, just generate those minds as your reason for studying this topic together, discussing this topic together. And you can also bring to mind specific people you want to keep in mind as we go through this topic, and bring them into the discussion and the process of learning about emptiness together. Sangye chedang sagi chonam lai janchu badu dani kapsi chi dagi chen sagi besenangi jala penche sangye jupala sho. Sangye chedang sagi chonam lai janchu badu dani kapsi chi dagi jinsa yibe senangi jala penche sangye parisho. I take refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. My practice of giving and other perfections may I become a Buddha to be able to benefit all sentient beings. And then this verse in the Vinaya that we often say at the beginning of these classes: he who came with compassion taught the holy Dharma so that all wrong views may be abandoned. Gautama, homage to him. Okay, so with that positive mind, let's engage into this topic of emptiness. And I'd like to remember that verse from Shantideva in the emptiness chapter, where he says that all these branches have been taught for the sake of wisdom. So it means all the teachings of the Buddha that came before the text, but in all the canon of the Buddha's teaching, everything that was taught was for the sake of this wisdom, realizing emptiness, because this is the key that gets us out of samsara for ourselves and others. So we have to understand it on the one hand to get ourselves out of the suffering. And then from the Bodhisattva's point of view, you want to learn it and all the different variations of its reasoning and understanding and how people get there, so that you can help all living beings understand it too. So then you become the teacher of others to help them as much as you're able. And then, of course, if you've realized it yourself directly, then that's the best way, isn't it? If you understand something profoundly yourself, then that's the best way to help others. Otherwise, like me, you're just guessing and explaining as best as you can what other people have taught you. So let's get a few terms clear then. This is what this session is going to be to start with: the self, the I. Then we've got the aggregates. So when we say I, or self, what do we mean? Buddhism has a very specific meaning when it says I, or self. And when we use the word self, that can get a little bit confusing, because self can be used in a few different contexts, but here we're going to use it as just synonymous with I. So when you say I, you're talking about you. Easy enough, right? And from a Buddhist point of view, what makes up a self or an I is explained in different parts. Basically, we can divide it into the body and the mind. Just quite simply, put that they're the body and the mind. That's the kind of two main parts that make up a person, a self or an I. So there's three terms that's synonymous. A person we've included there. That includes animals. Animals are also person. And a nice way to think about it is to think about in terms of this Tibetan term, which is called Sem-chen. Sem-chen is a Tibetan word. Sem means mind, and chen is the person possessing. So a mind possessor. The person who possesses the thing that possesses a mind, the person, the Sem-chen. Sometimes we translate that as sentient being. Sounds a bit weird, sentient being, doesn't it? I've used it so much now, since I started studying Buddhism, I forget, actually, maybe it's a bit weird for people to hear sentient being. Does it sound weird when you hear sentient being? It's just normal for me now, but I forget maybe for others it's a bit weird.
It's, for me, I haven't really understood it, but I like the words. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
I can't really explain any more than that. But what I do realise, I'm really quite, I suppose, and this is probably natural for being so early in the journey, is I'm very sensitive that words that are terms that are common to yourselves, I'm really hanging on. And last week, I think you talked about, and forgive me for any ignorance, Lama somebody, and I was like, I could only hear Lama, and I thought he's not talking about a Lama. This is a senior person in the Buddhist structure hierarchy in terms of offering teachings, and all I'm hearing is Lama. So I'm very sensitive to terms. And
exactly right. So if you need me just to slow down, repeat those names.
Fine, I will.
You just ask me, because sometimes I notice when people are familiar with names, they just rattle them off quite quickly and forget that people maybe haven't understood properly. So yeah, good comment. So we could think of these as a few more terms that are all synonymous: person, sentient being, sem-chen, I, self. For the purposes of our discussion here, let's think of those all synonymous. And they're just a way of describing someone who has a body and mind. Could be animals, could be other beings in other realms, could be humans. And there's a big difference between body and mind, which was explained a bit further down the list of DB modules. The first one, to be precise, is that the mind is not physical. There are things that exist in Buddhism that are not physical. So they can't be found with instruments, scientific instruments, although you can see the effects, obviously. And the body is physical, as we know, that's very straightforward. So there's a physical and non-physical element that work together. And the mind is this series of mental moments, one after the other. It's also an impermanent phenomena, changing moment by moment, as we talked about last week, impermanent phenomena. So the body and the mind are both impermanent, but one is physical and one is not physical. Yeah, but they affect each other quite profoundly. See, they work very closely together. The state of the body can affect how you feel, and likewise, how you feel can affect the state of the body. Yeah. I'm just kind of recapping just to make sure we're all on the same page, because we're going somewhere in a journey. So to make sure we understand the parts of it before we put them together.
Yeah.
And then when what happens at death then is that the mind leaves the body, and the mind and the body, so the body can't live without the mind. So the body then just fades away and dissolves into wherever, and then the mind continues. The subtlest part of the mind, not the grossest part, the subtlest parts of the mind continue then on to the next rebirth, propelled by karma that we've created. And it finds a new set of parents, enters the egg at the time of when the parents are engaged in sex. That's when the mind enters the egg, and the sperm and the egg meet. And then the same for the animals, obviously, and then other realms, it gets more complicated, but let's keep it simple. So that mind has this continuity of its own. And the body, has a certain continuity, but you leave it behind and you get a new one next life. Let's hope it's a good one. So those two parts, the body and the mind, essentially everything that makes up a person. There isn't anything else. And which is interesting because, from a theistic point of view, which is, predominantly the religions that we find on our planet here, they do believe in something else, that we're created by a superior being. We have a soul in there somewhere. So Buddhism doesn't believe in a soul. There is no extra solid thing in there that's created. It's just the mind. That's all there is, the mind and the body. Any questions on that so far? Because that's just to make sure we all understand the basic premise there. Now, when we talk about aggregates just means parts or heaps or lumps of something. So there is a way of dividing the mind and the body into 5 aggregates, form being the body, and then so there's 1 physical one and 4 mental ones. I'll list them, but there's no reason to really explain them at this point in the game. So they're form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. Let me say those again. Form, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness. So the last 4 are the mental ones. Obviously the form, the first one is the physical one. So you can subsume that list into the 2 of body and mind. So when we're talking about aggregates a bit further on in this session, we could think of it as just those 2 parts, the body and mind, or I think of it as 5 parts. Each of those parts also has parts. The body, as we know, has many parts, right? You could say it has, you could say the body has 5 limbs, a head and a torso, or you could go into all the parts of those parts, and then you kind of go on and on and on and on. So it depends how much you want to divide things. And the mind is the same, it has many parts. So feeling has parts, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness, they all have different parts, which we won't go into here. But we don't just have one mind, you have many different types of mind. Some of them are positive, as we explained before, some of them are negative, some of them are always there, some of them neutral. Yeah, so the mind also has parts. So let me put a question to you then, as we approach this topic. What do you think of as yourself, your I? What is it? It's an odd question, isn't it? We don't often think about this. We don't often have to think about it in our daily lives. But, you, yourself, you, I, the person, what is it exactly? I'll give you a Buddhist explanation, but what's your instincts about, what have you learned so far about yourself? Any thoughts on that? I'm not saying it's a right or wrong answer, I'm just curious.
This is what I've paid thousands for in therapy, actually, Kerry.
Good choice.
Join you guys, so I'm a little bit cheesed off about that, so I'll have to manage that feeling. I think of I have a changing perception of self, can be by minute, hour, day. But I would think of my ethics, my morals,
Right. Good. Yeah.
the way I treat others. I suppose if I wasn't in the room and somebody I knew well, described Michelle, I hope, there's a physical description. But I think as a person, it's the stuff from within.
Right.
So your soul. But yeah, despite what you've just said.
Yeah. Cool. Nice. Yeah. So you're thinking more about the internal qualities and your personality and integrity, that kind of thing. That's you.
Yeah.
Yourself.
Definitely integrity. Yeah. When no one's watching, how do I do what I say I do?
Right. What about you, Edita? Do you want to share something? No. I'm just looking at my notes, make sure I don't go off track. So we could also say, couldn't we, from one point of view, I suppose, that this self is the person that experiences the results of our positive and negative karma. So if we're experiencing something positive, then we've created that karma in the past, probably a past life, probably not much this life, but usually they say karmic experiences come from past lives, and consequently things that we're creating now will be experienced in future lives, not necessarily this life. Unless they're very powerful, then we can experience them in this life. And then likewise, the suffering experiences that we go through are also the results of bad decisions that we've made in the past, unskillful things we did in the past, bad karma, negative karma that is now ripening as suffering experiences for ourselves. And that's something to think about, because this the whole reason of this topic of understanding emptiness is to try and get us out of that cycle. On the branches side of it, if you like, of the tree, we want to engage as many positive actions as we can so that we experience happiness and result happiness in future lives, in this life. And then we reduce the weeds and the negative stuff that we create as much as possible, because we don't want that, right? It's for our own interests. And where all that comes from is the ignorance that thinks that things exist inherently. And not only just things, actually, the important one to think about is that our self, our I, exists inherently. That ignorance that mistakenly believes that there is an inherent real I in here somewhere is what causes our afflictive states of mind, which we talked about last time, right? On the basis of those afflictive states of mind, we then engage, like we are under control of those, and we engage in actions such as, stealing, killing, gossip, lying, divisive speech. All those kind of actions of the body and speech come from those afflictive states of mind, destructive emotions. And then once we've engaged in that action, we've then imprinted on our mind stream a seed, a karmic seed, depending where it came from. So we do positive and negative things all the time. But if it came from the wish, for example, to harm others, then that's necessarily going to be a kind of, we'll call it a black karmic seed, or a negative karmic energy we put on our mind stream, which at some point, unless we pull it out, at some point in the future will ripen as negative karma for ourselves. So there's a correlation, isn't there, between the reason why we did an action, the action itself, the seed that's implanted, and the suffering we're going to experience. Or likewise, still on the basis of ignorance, we can still create positive karma, because we haven't realized emptiness yet, right? But we can still create positive karma for ourselves. It's not enough to get us out of samsara yet. It keeps us in samsara, but it'll then give us the pleasant things of samsara, if you like, the precious human rebirth, the resources that we need, the people liking us, the people taking us seriously, the good health example, the good situations we find ourselves in, the easiness of finding jobs and friends and comforting, safe surroundings. So all those come from the wish to benefit others. That created a positive action that we did for others. That created a positive seeds, a positive karmic energy in our mind, which resulted in our positive experience. But to create the karmic energy to get out of samsara altogether, we have to realize this self, this I, underneath it all, doesn't exist how it appears. So that's what we're looking at here. So let's look at this reason then. We're going to look at something called the fourfold reasoning. Just 4 points to remember. And this is a short version of something that great master called Chandakirti. He did very different reasons. One of them was sevenfold one, and one was a 4.1. And actually, these come from the Buddha and the sutras, come through Nagarjuna and through the Buddha eventually, from the Buddha in the sutras. So this fourfold one is quite a good one to get a hold of what we're talking about in emptiness, I think. Okay, the first point of this one is what's called identifying the object to be negated, or the object of negation. The object to be refuted. They're all kind of synonyms, right? We have to identify what is this ignorance is seeing, first of all. And that's an important step. And that actually, apparently, is one of the hardest ones. So there's a nice story that Geshe Tashi told me when I first learned this topic with him in London all those years ago. So you're trying to find, let's say, there's you're in a hotel somewhere, or a house, you're in a house. No, you're in a hotel with many rooms, and you've been told that there's a thief in the hotel somewhere, and you have to try and identify where this thief is, so you can stop him stealing, obviously, and causing chaos. So you start wandering around the hotel looking for a thief, but it comes clear after a little while, you don't actually know what this thief looks like. So, you meet somebody and think, oh, is he the thief or she the thief? I don't know. So you can't accuse them, you can't accuse every single person in the hotel that you meet of being a thief. That would just be bizarre. And you could wander around in circles, couldn't you, trying to find this thief. But if you don't know what you're looking for, you're not actually going to be able to identify. So therefore, what you need is a photo fit or wanted poster or something, because it's going to tell you exactly what this thief looks like. So then once you've got this information, then you can refer to, okay, you see this person come down the hall. Is it this person? No. Is it this person? No, I'm looking for a she and it's a he, so it's not that one. So I'm ruling out half the population of the hotel already. So you're narrowing it down. And then when you see this person and then you see the photograph, you go, exactly, exactly that's the person. You can go bam, straight on it. Otherwise, what the text says, it's like you're shooting arrows in the dark, trying to hit the target. Unless you know exactly what this ignorance is thinking, you're not going to be able to disprove it. You're not going to you're not going to be able to find the opposite to it. You'll just be guessing, and you could be just guessing forever. That's just a waste of time. So you really have to be clear about what the ignorance is doing. We have to be clear about how the ignorance is projecting a false I. And that's a bit hard thing to get hold of. Sometimes they say in the text, like Pabonka Rinpoche, there's another name, Pabonka Rinpoche, in a book called Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, which is essentially a series of Lam Rim teachings. He goes through these different examples, which are used by a lot of lamas since then, about how you can identify what this feels like, this wrong sense of I, this false sense of I. So sometimes you apparently feel it when you're frightened, like for example, you're about to cross a road and the car suddenly swerves the corner and you almost can get knocked over. That kind of feeling of like, oh, it's like something in there that you kind of want to preserve or want to grasp onto. Suddenly frightened, that fight or flight mechanism. Or sometimes apparently it comes up when you're people are judging you falsely. You're being accused of something that you didn't do. And you have this sense of indignation. Think, I didn't do that. That wasn't me. And for sure it wasn't you, but people are believing it. And that kind of apparently brings out this strong sense of concrete me, I in there. So there's a few moments apparently, if we're looking for it, we can have a sense of how we've already built up this strong sense of concrete I in here somewhere. And usually we point to here, don't we, in the chest. I always have the feeling, like, if you've ever seen Men in Black, and they have one of these, I think I can't remember which one it is, Men in Black, and they open up this human body, and actually inside there's a little guy with levers there pulling the body around, and he's got like little buttons and things, and he's watching the screen where the eyes are. So because we have a strong connection with ourselves as the brain in the West, I think that the idea that actually the eye is in here somewhere is quite strong also. But when you catch yourself frightened or on a verge of kind of risk somewhere, sometimes you just have a strong feeling your eye is here. We don't often think of it in our legs or our hands, do we? It's usually something like the brain or the chest area. Interesting enough, something in Eastern cultures, like Tibetans, for example, they would often point to the eye, the self, as here. This is where the heart, exactly. This is where the self, the person is. We would often think of it as the brain. So that's what we need to think about when first of all we're going through these 4 reasons, is try to identify how the wrong eye is projecting this self, because otherwise we don't know what we're going to try and prove is wrong. Does that make sense? I don't know if I said that clearly or not, but it's a complex topic. I'm sorry if I'm bumbling through it. I remember once I went to Iona in Scotland, the west coast, and you have to go through the island of Mull to get there. It was a beautiful part of the country. There was a retreat centre there. And then one day I was walking on my own over these hills, and I thought, oh, let's be adventurous. Rather than walking around these mountains, why do I go over the top? I just thought, well, I've got plenty of time. So I walked over the top and met down again. And then suddenly, before I knew it, I was crawling along this little ledge thinking, oh, well, I started. So, let's continue. And before I know it, I crouched down because it was getting lower and lower. And then suddenly the sea appeared to my right. I was like, oh, I'm on the edge of a cliff here suddenly. So I thought, well, maybe there's a way out further on. And if I keep going, so I crawled along. It was like a dead end. So I was like on the edge of this cliff, basically, with like this much space left, the sea pounding along below me. One false step, I would have been dead. And then I had a very strong sense of I tell you. I did nearly die that day. It was exciting. So is that those kind of moments, we need to think about. If I didn't have any Buddhist training then, so I kind of wasted the opportunity. But if now I would have thought, okay, quickly think, memorize this I, and then what I should have done is like program it in what it feels like, and so I don't forget. And then later on, when I come to it in meditation, I can remember what this strong sense of I felt like. Because most of the time, it's very hidden, and we don't see it. It's only these strong emotional moments in our lives that apparently it kind of appears, in a sense, or the mind makes it manifest for us in this sometimes physical way. Yeah. Any questions about that point before I move on?
No, I'm just thinking about, you've just given me a thought. I was in China and I'd met a friend in Beijing, and we'd gone out sick of the city, sick of the smog and the spitting, went out into the country, found a stretch of the wall, and we were like, right, tomorrow morning, 3 a.m, we're going to set off. And when we got to the piece, you could either go right, and that was a modernized part of the wall, or you could go left, and it was not. We did, for sunrise, we went right, and then we spent the rest of the day left. Yeah, we made some decisions and actually did a Thelma and Louise and had to jump off at some point.
Oh my good God.
And we scratched our arms and everything like that. And then we got in, and the woman was like, in Mandarin, where have you been? We've been worried. What have you been doing? And it's like, yeah, you don't want to know. We didn't tell anybody because we were so embarrassed and stupid. Right. One of those where you throw your backpack and then you jump yourself.
Yes, yeah.
So yes, that was thinking then.
So that would have been the good time to identify what this I felt like, those moments where you were, close to some danger. So yeah, so think about the next time it happens. Also, if you're watching a scary movie, for example, and suddenly, someone bangs the door or as a ghost appears, kind of like that kind of solid sense of I sometimes can then suddenly appear then, as much when you're kind of suddenly frightened. So just see if you can spot this false I that you created. It's hard to even know that we created it. Like I say, most of the time it's just subtle in the background and we don't even see we're doing it. And it only comes kind of manifest, if you like, in those manifest to us consciously anyway, in those extreme moments. So that's important. So that's kind of like what the inherently self-existent I would be. If it existed, it would be that. Yeah. So then the next point, number 2, it's another grand title, but don't panic. It's called Asserting the Pervasion, or Establishing, I prefer better, Establishing the Pervasion. It's something to do with Tibetan, well, Eastern logic and debates, pervasion. We won't go into that. Signs and reasonings, if you're interested. So the reason is goes like this. If the I did exist inherently, as we found already in point 1, it would have to either be the body and the mind, or it would have to be something different. So that's the statement in number 2. Does that make sense? So if the I did exist inherently, as we've identified in 1, it would have to be either the body and mind, those aggregates we could say, or it would have to be something different than that. There's no other option, is there? Or is there? If it existed, it would have to be one of those options. Body and the mind, one hand, or something else. That covers everything, doesn't it? So getting clear on that is really important, this second step. There's nowhere else it could possibly exist. It has to be one of those 2 options. And that's what you mean by establishing pervasion. It sounds like a grand title, but it just means you're becoming certain of something. There's some other examples. Oh no, we won't go to those. I don't know why. Those are in the notes. Let me confuse me, never mind confuse you. Yeah, so we're going through a process here meditatively, and that's the first 2 points done then. So we've established that what the I would look like if it existed. Identifying the object to be negated is the title officially, but if the I exists inherently, it would look like this. And the pervasion is that, well, if it did exist like that, it would have to be either 1, the body and the mind, or 2, would have to be something else. Does that make sense so far? Any questions? Great. All right. So then the 3rd and 4th points there are those. So if it existed within the body and the mind, bam, bam, bam. If it existed outside the body and mind, bam, bam, bam. So then the pervasion, those 2 options that you established in number 2, is now what you look at in detail in 3 and 4. So let's look at the self. Let's see if the self can be found in the body and mind. That's the first one. So you're investigating now with your mind if that self, which you identify in 1, can be in the body and mind, or is the body and mind. Better to say is the body and mind. You can say, sometimes say set to text say in, but let's just keep it simple and say, is the self, is the body and mind or not? Basically, we're just saying that, aren't we? Is the self the body and mind or not? Or is it something else? So the body and the mind, let's look at the body. So is the self the body? This inherently existent self is what we're looking for. Yeah. This real I that we found at number 1 is what we're looking for. So if it was a real, then we should be able to find it under analysis. Now, remember this thing we did about the car last week, or the chariot, as Chantikiti would call it. We looked through all the different parts. I mean, although there was many parts, we couldn't find the car. Although we knew car was there, it was labeled on these different sections, but we couldn't find it. Actually, when we analyzed all those different parts, we weren't able to find the car in any one of those parts. So you're doing a similar thing here, trying to find the inherent I, the inherently existent I in the body. So we could point to the brain, for example, which is probably what most of us think is the I, to be honest, in the West. When it comes down to it, you'd probably say that, wouldn't you? Because everything else can be transplanted, but we haven't done a brain transplant yet, have we? As far as I know. Everything else, like heart transplant, has been done already. So you can, if you thought that I was the heart, and you had a heart transplant, then I would be moved to somebody else's body. But obviously that's not the case now. We know that. You can have a pig's heart now, can't you? And you're still there. So we disproved that. And actually you can, there are examples of people living with half a brain, aren't there? And different brain missing, isn't there? And, so they're still there. So you can't say that the brain is the I, because if part of it is missing, then part of you will be missing. You might lose some of your memories, perhaps. But you wouldn't say that you'd stop, that you'd stop being an I. that yourself was somehow less now, or you got half an I. That would be bizarre, wouldn't it? You're still there. So it brings us some interesting thoughts for us, doesn't it? Because, as I say, for us, mostly, we don't believe in the mind, we just believe in the body. So this is a good place for us to be meditating on this section here. If you lost, your legs and your arms, would you still exist? Would the I still exist? Yes.
Yes.
Of course you would, wouldn't you? Yeah. At what point wouldn't you exist? How much could you take away before there was no I left? It's interesting. It's Holness in a book, I think it's called Crossroads to Consciousness, which is a fascinating book, and one of these old mind and life sciences now. I think that was one from the 80s, early 90s, where he's talking to scientists, and this one scientist just didn't like the Dalai Lama at all. She was just arguing with him and wouldn't, take him seriously. She didn't know why he was there, but he was still debating with her anyway. And saying something along the lines of, well, if you're cutting, if a brain scientist has these brains on the workshop and is like cutting through slices of the brain, do they think that, this is a person there? They're kind of sectioning into different parts and putting into jars. Probably not. By that point, they stop thinking that brain is an I. Anyway, it's just different thoughts, to just for your own, maybe you have better thoughts than me about this. Just try and prove to your ignorant mind that the body can't be this inherent I. That's what we're doing here, right? It might be the I, but you have to prove it for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Maybe you find a part of the body that is the I, in which case the Buddha was wrong. So, you have to investigate. Interesting thought, right? So we're skipping through here a bit, but you have to do this analysis yourself, of course, in the end. Anyway, so that was the body. So after that, you probably think, well, this real inherent I can't be in the body. And one of the big reasons, of course, from Buddhist point of view is, excuse me, we leave the body behind and we continue. So from that point of view, nothing of the physical can be the I, because everything here we're just going to leave. And it was only created recently anyway. Under analysis, we looked at all those parts and we can't find it. So therefore, you can prove to yourself, after a bit of investigation, that this inherent existence I can't be the body. What about the mind then? So if it's the mind, that would make more sense, right? Because the mind continues to life. But the mind actually itself is only just a series of parts, as we said before, that are all impermanent. So what about, if we said that if your I is the mind, then which bit of the mind are we talking about? It can't be like an emotional state that comes and goes. Like, for example, anger. You can't say that the I is anger because you're not always angry, so therefore you wouldn't always exist. You only exist when the anger is there and not when it's not. That wouldn't make any sense. And that would apply then to all the emotions that come and go, positive and negative ones. So you can't be any of those. Or if you were one of those, even those are impermanent. So it'd be hard to judge. It'd be hard to say that you're any one of those things because, they have a beginning, middle, and end, and one moment leads to the next. So the mind that I had yesterday, is that the I? Because that mind that I had yesterday doesn't exist anymore. The mind that will, that's going to exist in about 20 minutes time, I don't have that right now. So this mind that I have now is the I, but that moment's then passed, and another moment's come. So is that one the I? No, it can't be, because that's now passed away. So suddenly, if you're trying to label an inherent object onto something impermanent, you're going to get stuck, because it's always changing. There isn't a moment there where it's a solid entity that isn't unchanging thing. We could have used that argument for the body also, but just as more juicy ones for the body.
So
there's an interesting thing to think about here, is that this inherent nature and an impermanent nature, they're mutually exclusive. You can't have one that's the same. You can't have something that's the same, impermanent and inherent. Yeah, Michelle, go ahead.
I'm just thinking about I suppose the Western view and then the Eastern view, and then just thinking we use phrases like brain dead. And yeah, we do. And then do you associate, I suppose, death with, yeah, your heart stops beating. I'm trying to like look at those and apply those to,
yeah, good.
Yeah, inherent nature, impermanent.
Yeah.
But my gosh, Kerry, I think this needs to be a morning subject, because there's no way you can sleep off the back of this. You're ruining my life.
Sorry about that.
Big statement.
Yeah. I'll tell you the story about this guy who got frightened when he was meditating emptiness once. I'll finish this reasoning and then we'll
yeah.
that story. Yeah, so you need some investigation. What you need to do is you need to study this topic, because it's not easy. And you need to study what reasons and what investigations and logic, realized masters who've realized emptiness would be better have thought about, and then you kind of see if that means anything to you. So it needs some study. You need to look at that carefully. And Lama Zopa is a fantastic person who makes it really real and juicy, because as I mentioned in that dedication prayer, for example, that's a interesting thing to think about. It really jars with how we see things normally. And that's what emptiness is going to do to us. It's going to feel strange. The realization, emptiness, I should say. So where are they? So that was number 2. So then after all that investigation, then let's pretend we've done all that. So then what you realize is, well, the I, this inherent existent I, can't be the body and the mind for all those different reasons. When you convince yourself of that. Yeah. So we'll just assume whether you have or not is just intellectual. We're exploring this for now, but we'll assume that this person has done that work and that they understood that the body and the mind can't be inherent existent I anywhere in that, because they're impermanent for one thing. As you say, can't be the body for those different reasons. So then they're convinced. But then they go back to the pervasion, which says, so if it is inherent, it'd have to be the body and the mind or something else. So then they're back to or something else, and that's point number 4, something else. So then you imagine you've got your body and the mind here, in this kind of little category here. Then you think, well, what else could the I be? This inherent existent I. What else would it be if it's not the body and mind? What else would it be? What else is it that makes up a person?
Is that a question to us, Kerry? Sorry.
If you got an answer, yeah.
If we can't describe a car or define a car, I'm putting it to the human body as no. Our ability to think.
That's to do with the mind. That's thinking. That's mental processes. So we've already discounted the mind.
Oh, right. Okay, I'm out then.
If you were like a Christian or the atheistic religion, you probably say, well, the soul, that's what would be left. This kind of magic, this permanent, solid, non-changing, glowing ball that goes back to heaven, etc. Not criticizing, just saying that probably
no, you're not.
That's just where you come to. But from Buddhist point of view, there is no soul. So once you've discounted the body and the mind, as on the left-hand side here, on the right-hand side, there isn't anything else. So what's the conclusion then? The inherent existent I can't be anything other than the body and mind either.
Yeah.
So then, ta-da, what you're left with, the inherent existent I does not exist. You've proven that to yourself, because in point 3, it was the body and mind, and we knew it wasn't that. We said it has to be something else then, and we know it's not that. So therefore, the inherent existent I does not exist. This thing that we identified at point 1 cannot exist. And then hopefully you'd realize emptiness. But obviously, we're just exploring it intellectually at this point. We'd have to study it a lot further in detail. We'd have to have quite profound levels of concentration to really kind of penetrate that at a deep level, which is where the change happens. Yeah. Does that make sense, that reason then? It's quite a nice juicy one, isn't it, to go through? Those are the ways you can explore that one, but that's just one to start with. So let me tell you a story about this this Geshe who was in the audience. I mean, they say, you know, the way to realize emptiness is just got to have tons and tons and tons of positive karma behind you. It's like the fuel to realize some of these things is quite profound. So the way, you know, you get to any realizations is just depends on what your positive karmic balance is. So that's why I say you've got to do tons and tons of purification and realization, purification and accumulation, you know, purifying all the negative stuff, doing as much positive things as you can and creating that positive karmic energy. And on the wave of that karmic energy, at some point, when the time is right, you'll hear these words and you'll go bang, like the penny drops, and suddenly you get it. I'm definitely not there yet, so I don't know about you guys, but anyway, so there was this teaching on emptiness that a Lama was giving somewhere, and in the audience there was all these people meditating, listening carefully, and suddenly in the audience, while the Lama was explaining emptiness, this Geshe kind of grabs himself and goes, ah, like this in the middle of the audience, like he's going to lose himself suddenly. And that's kind of, that was like a trigger for him to realize actually that there is no inherent existent self, and he was suddenly afraid of losing something. He's like suddenly got very frightened. And apparently that's quite a common, well, one of my monk friends told me it's quite a common thing that, you know, if you get close to the realization of emptiness, you actually get quite frightened because you're losing yourself somehow. It's not true, because, you know, you don't exist inherently, you never have, but that concrete sense of, that concrete holding on to eyes, we'd be holding on forever, and suddenly for it to disappear must be quite, you know, scary, I guess, when you realize that nothing, including yourself, doesn't exist inherently. So anyway, I tell you that. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's all we have to do to realize emptiness. Make lots of positive karma, purify negative karma as much as we can, keep studying, and at some point, you know, we'll understand it intellectually, and then we keep listening to teachings, and then we keep meditating, keep good ethics, keep a clear mind, and then at some point the penny will drop and we'll realize it. Now, when we realize emptiness, it's not the end. We're not suddenly enlightened. We're not suddenly out of samsara. There's a bit of a way to go. And next week I'll explain those stages, a bit about once we realize emptiness, you know, where we go from there. I might look at some of the other reasons of true emptiness as well. There's one called the King of Reasons, which is dependent arising, which we'll look at. Yeah, so any questions?
Kerry, where are the recordings kept? Are they on the page? And I've missed them. Sorry if I have.
Sure, yeah, they're on our YouTube channel, Jamming Leads TV. Jamming Leads TV.
Yeah, yeah. Of course, yeah. Thank you.
So on the basis of believing in this our inherent existent I, we've engaged in so many, you know, unskillful actions on its basis. This thing that doesn't even exist, we've done so much to protect it, so much to nurture it, so much money spent on its therapy, so much money spent on spa days, so much money spent on holidays to just kind of keep this inherent existent I happy that doesn't exist. You know, we've done so much since the beginning of time. We've done so much, you know, unskillful and mistaken actions in the past because we thought this I existed, but it was never there to begin with. On its basis, we've kept ourselves trapped in suffering states of samsara for something that doesn't even exist. Isn't that depressing? It's odd to think that we even have a wrong view about how we exist. You know, who would even think about it? I mean, most people never think about it. I don't think I've got a wrong view on emptiness. I just assume that, you know, if I don't know something, I'll find out. But be told that you instinctively believe something that's so profoundly wrong all the time since beginning's rebirth is a bit shocking. And that's what the Buddha is saying, essentially, is we believed in this wrong sense of self since forever. There's never been a point when we haven't had it. We didn't learn it. It was just always been there. Difficulty when we talk about beginning as time, but I won't go into that. But now that we started to investigate, and someone's saying, actually, this, well, the way that the Lamas and the Buddhas very skillfully come at it is, you know, he tells us that you're experiencing difficulty, aren't you? And you go, yes, but I'm experiencing difficulty. Experiencing old age and death, aren't you? He says, yes. And even during the life, which is supposed to be quite a pleasant life in wholesome psychic experiences, it's still underlying, you're still dissatisfied, you still get anxious, you still get upset, and these crazy things happen to you, and you have no idea where they come from. So the Buddha, first of all, just explains to us, actually, this is your experience, isn't it? This is what where you are right now, and you kind of go, well, yes, you're right. And then the Buddha says, well, this is where it comes from. It comes from your afflicted states of mind. The reason why you can't be happy is because of these deluded states of mind. They kind of bully you and bash you about and pull you here, there, and everywhere. On that basis, you kind of follow them and engage into actions like killing, stealing, lying, and then you create more suffering for yourself. So there's different levels of this afflicted states of mind. And at the end of that, he says, well, how can I get rid of all these afflicted states of mind? I don't want any of this anymore. He says, well, that's the third noble truth. The third noble truth is that you can be completely free of all this suffering completely, forever. You never have to have any of these minds ever again. And how do you do that? Well, that's the fourth noble truth, the noble truth of the path, which comes down to the wisdom realizing emptiness. That's where it's all leading to. This is why it says, Shantidevi says, all these branches were taught for the sake of wisdom. Everything the Buddha taught was for the sake of wisdom realizing emptiness, because that ultimately is the root of all the suffering. And the experiences, not only the suffering states of mind, but the experiences that we experience as a human or an animal, because of the karma we create on that basis. So we're very fortunate at this point in our lives to be able to at least have heard this information once, because that creates a very powerful imprint. There aren't many people that are on this planet right now that are able to have the conditions to study this kind of topic, for one thing. And actually, on this planet right now, Buddhism is the only system that explains that there's no inherent existent I or phenomena. Every other system, religious system on the planet that exists would explain at some point there is an inherent something somewhere. So we found the one system that doesn't. Interesting, isn't it? So Buddhism actually, in this respect, is very close to scientific findings. When you talk about quantum mechanics, for example, where things are neither here nor there, depending on how you look at it. So it's very close, isn't it, to what the Buddha was already saying 2,500 years ago, which is interesting.
Yeah. Without much, with hardly any study of any religion, just the one thing that I suppose draws me in, gives me an interest, an active interest for lots of different reasons. I touched on when I did my intro in the first session, is that it just continues to be relevant every day. And again, limited experience of teachings, and I will continue to challenge my view, etc. But it just seems to me to be relevant every day, and we are being, the Buddha invites us to challenge that view. So it's not a this is X, Y, and Z. It invites you to challenge and apply to yourself, and that to me is a logic. And all of these parts, I'm sure I'll get lost in all these parts in the teachings, but again, if we talk about looking at it, I'm not a quantum physicist, I'm not a physicist, but again, that has logic behind it, and that gives me some sort of comfort as on a path. Whereas again, I'm not a Christian, I don't go to church, I never have, for example, but it seems to be a little bit this is the fact, and there's no room, or you just wouldn't challenge it, so per se. I don't know why I'm saying this now, I've forgotten what my point is, but there you go.
It's fine. Just
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know of any other traditions, that I've come across that go into this with detail on this kind of philosophical side, as might say. Most religions are concerned, like Christianity is very heavily concerned about looking after others and making sure that everyone's safe and kind to each other, that they're generous, etc. And being as close to God's qualities and Jesus' qualities as possible to make themselves better Christians. But they don't have this side where they investigate the nature of reality and how themselves and phenomena exist. I never noticed that in any of the other religions. It may be there, but just I've never found it anyway. But nothing, as far as I know, it goes into this level of detail that says things don't exist inherently. It's quite a profound leap to make. I'm sure other philosophers, however, have approached something similar to that. Western philosophers, but they might have just been hearing what the Buddha said initially. Yeah. So I would invite you to continue to meditate on impermanence. I think that's a good way to get into it. Revise these 4 points if you like. There are other texts that explain these 4 points. There's a good book by the Dalai Lama called How. I can't remember it now. It's got on my mind. I can see the cover, but I can't remember the title. Anyway, I'll find that for next time. In the last few weeks, the last weeks 3 and 4, 4 and 5 of this course, we'll look at a bit more into details about different levels of emptiness, the way that we realize emptiness once we've got there, how long it takes to become an arhat and a Buddha, etc. We might look at some of the more reasons proving emptiness. There's a couple of topics that are very close to this topic, which you won't go into here, but just for your further reading. So if you go on to further study, maybe later, do the basic program, for example. The current topic of the basic program leads anyway is called tenets, different schools of tenets, Buddhist philosophical thought. That goes through different levels of what exists and what doesn't, kind of going through subtle stages till you get to the final stage, which is what we talked about here. Nothing exists inherently. Because the Buddha did teach things to different people depending on what they need. So for some people, to hear that things don't exist inherently would be too disturbing, and they kind of have such aversion for it that they wouldn't want to continue, and they just kind of can the whole thing. It'd be too extreme from their point of view. So then Buddha, with his clairvoyance and his infinite wisdom, will be able to see that these people wouldn't be a good fit. So for those people, would say, okay, well, things do exist inherently, but they exist inherently in a little less subtle way. So for some people, the Buddha would say that because he knew to tell them the whole picture would be scary, and they'd freak out. So there's different levels that the Buddha taught, from things do exist inherently to things don't exist and nothing exists inherently. So it kind of went through these stages. Some things do, some things don't. Most things do, some things don't, and then nothing does. So it's kind of going through these grades, and that's very helpful for our little minds, because to suddenly leap into the nothing exists inherently is quite a leap. So, but if we kind of chipped away a little bit by little bit, thinking this bit doesn't exist, but these do, that'd help us. Then we kind of get more of a conceptual idea as we go along. So that topic of tenets is really helpful, going through those steps and kind of chipping off more and more as you go along. Another thing that's closely related to this is called the two truths. Two truths are a way to just not get lost, I suppose, of what exists and what doesn't. And each of the schools has different variations of that, but essentially, conventional truths are what we see around us, those things that appear to exist inherently, and the ultimate truths are things that is just emptiness, the empty nature of those. And those two truths exist simultaneously. So we do exist. It's important to remember that we do exist. So the kind of conventional or kind of provisional nature, if you like, of ourselves is that we are this body and mind. We have these parts, we do these functions, we say good things, we do bad things, we have this karma kicking about, etc. That's the conventional side of us, but ultimately there is no real I. There is no real body, there is no real mind, there is no real karma, there is no real actions. It's all lacking in an inherent nature. And those two both exist, the emptiness and the conventional nature. So we don't want to lose track of things that exist. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck. So this is what I mentioned in the first session. We have to be careful we don't fall into these extremes. One extreme thinking that things do exist concretely, and the other extreme thinking that things don't exist at all. Both of those are to be avoided. So at the moment, we're stuck in this one that thinks things exist concretely, inherently, really. So as we go along on the journey to emptiness, we're going to move slowly, probably as more we study emptiness, move slowly towards that side of nihilism, think that things don't exist at all, which is probably fine. We need to kind of push the boundaries a little bit. But as long as you don't end up believing that things don't exist, that'll be a mistake. They do exist. There is a self, there is an I. But as Lama Tsong Khapa says, how it exists is so subtle, it's almost like it doesn't exist at all. Yeah. So on that basis then, let's do a little meditation to finish with. And we'll just finish a little bit earlier today. So we just find a space to get comfortable, have a little stretch, take a deep breath, whatever you need to do just to calm the mind and clear the thoughts for a moment. And then just bring to mind a time where you've been, frightened or scared suddenly, or you were falsely accused of something, and this strong sense of me or I suddenly appears to you. See if you can get a grasp on that. And see if you can program into your mind, kind of press the record button to remember that sensation. And each time you do this meditation, you can rebuild on that so it gets really clear, identifying what this ignorance is believing, how this ignorance is misknowing. If it did exist like that, it would have to be the body and the mind or something else. So if it was the body and mind, we'd be able to find it in an investigation. Just bring to mind those reasons about why it can't be the body. And then there's reasons why it can't be the mind, constantly changing, emotions coming and going. Sometimes we say, I'm feeling tired, which means the body's probably needed sleep, food. So then you're identifying the I as the body. Sometimes you say, I'm upset, which has nothing to do with the body, so that's the mind. So then you're identifying the I as the mind. So we flip about, don't we, depending on what we're focusing on. This is perfectly okay, nothing wrong with that. But if we're trying to find this real I, we know it can't be either of those. So then point 4 is, well, it must be something else. But if, we only exist as the body and the mind, what else could it be, this I? What other part of us is there? This I that got frightened, was wrongly accused. If it's not the body and mind, then what other part could it be? There's not some magical part in there we haven't discovered yet. So this real I, inherent I, can't exist. It's impossible. How we exist is merely labeled on those parts. And that's all that's needed. We don't need to be anything else. We're impermanent, we're constantly changing, moving on this life, next life, next life. Bodies come and go. There's no point where any of that could be concrete, solid me. But you do exist. You're labeled on all these moving parts. So then any positive karma we've created by meditating on discussing this topic of wisdom realizing emptiness together, we dedicate for our own awakening to realize emptiness profoundly and quickly so we can help ourselves and others. Get ourselves and others out of this suffering mess once and for all. And in the meantime, dedicate for all those people who need our help around the world. Dedicate it for the sake of all living beings. Kind of imagining giving it to all living beings. So then we'll dedicate, as Lama Zopa suggests, may the I, who is completely empty of existing from its own side, become fully enlightened, which is completely empty of existing from its own side. You need all sentient beings who are completely empty of existing from their own side. To that enlightened state, which is also completely empty of existing from its own side. By myself alone, who is completely empty of existing from its own side. Thank you so much. I'll just stop the recording now.